Hi friends, Happy New Year to all of you. I hope you all had just a tremendous Christmas season, a Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year's. I hope you had a chance to get some rest during that time period. We all know that the holidays can just be so hectic and busy for parties and friends and family and doing a lot of things that for many of us, we get to the end of the season, we go, I kind of feel like I missed it. I hope that wasn't the case for you, and I hope that you just had just a really, really wonderful end of your 2018. Because it's now 2019, and we're rocking, and we're underway, and I can tell you that we're super, super excited here at Walking the Text for what is to come over this next year. A large part is due to the results we got from the survey we sent out recently, and we had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people from all over the world take our survey. And I just want to highlight for you 4 numbers that will help you to understand what to expect from us over this next year. The first is that 84% of you said that you loved getting the teaching series every week and you wanted that to continue as opposed to getting it like every other week or once a month. And so this is going to continue to come every Tuesday. And that's because 96% of you said Tuesday was in fact the best day of the week to receive it. So that's the second number. The third number is that 90% of you said that the length of the teaching series each week was great. And in fact, of the remaining 10%, there was a higher percentage of you who wanted the teaching series longer than those of you who wanted it shorter. So we are going to maintain the length that we have been doing here over this last year at Walking the Text. And then finally, 99% of you said that your engagement with Walking the Text was helping you to learn, love, and live out the Bible by understanding its original context. And that's what we're about. That's why we exist. We want to help you to grow in your relationship with God, to grow in your relationship with Jesus Christ, the Holy Spirit, through the understanding of the Bible. What was God saying? What is God saying? How do we take what we're learning and how do we walk it out anew? And so with that in mind, we are launching forward here in 2019. We are taking the comments that you offered about different types of teachings you would like for me to do, different studies that you would like us to do, and I will talk about one of those at the end of this teaching to talk about how we're going to launch our first series here in 2019. But we've collated it. We know what you're looking for, and we are going to be giving you teachings in the realm of what many of you said, this is what we would love to have. So thank you so much for those of you who took time to do it. It was just really helpful and affirming to us to know kind of where we're at with you and how to serve you well in the new year. Well, today's teaching series episode is a standalone teaching, and I think it's a great teaching that launches us forward here in 2019, and it has to do with a really cool phrase that first shows up in Deuteronomy 32:10. And when I learned the context around this years ago, since then, this has been one of my favorite passages. And in fact, this phrase will get used multiple times in the Hebrew Scriptures. And some of my favorite passages in the Older Testament are around where this phrase shows up. So let me show you this passage. So Deuteronomy 32:10. Moses is speaking here. The end of the 40 years has come. Moses is about ready to die. He's going to pass on leadership to Joshua. And he is speaking to the people, talking about how God took care of them over these last 40 years, this vulnerable experience in a very harsh desert. And Moses says this, God, found him, Israel, in a desert land and in the howling emptiness of a wilderness. He encircled him. He cared for him. He guarded him as the apple of his eye. Now, this reference to the word eye is very significant in the ancient world, particularly in Egypt, where Israel just 40 years prior had just concluded more than 400 years in the land of Egypt. And one of the ways that helps us to see the significance of eyes in ancient Egypt is with this archaeological artifact called the Narmer Palette. Narmer. This thing's more than 2 feet tall, and it's from the very first Egyptian pharaoh, Narmer, who ruled roughly 3000 BC. So we're talking 5,000 years ago is when this thing was constructed, and it's still like in mint condition. And it's absolutely remarkable. And it is a palette, not a palette to use, for painting watercolors or anything like that, but actually for painting one's eyes. You see, in ancient Egypt, there was a belief that the gods, that the divine, a part of the divine resided in each human being, and it was in their eyes. So the eyes have always been seen as this just amazing thing, right? I mean, our eyes are so important to our existence, and they're absolutely powerful, not only in their capacity to capture color and depth and contour and contrast and all of that, but even metaphorically, it's like our eyes set our direction in life. And so the people in the ancient world, at least in Egypt, believed that the divine resided in the eyes. And among the gods who provided this, if you will, or the god most often associated to the one who resided in people, was the god Horus. And this Narmer palette was actually offered as a dedicatory gift, oh my goodness, I can't even say it. It dedicated it to the god, all right? So there you go. To the god Horus. In fact, the god Horus is a falcon represented here on the palette in the upper right-hand corner. And so at a Horus temple in Egypt, this is where this was found at the end of the 19th century. And here is actually where you would put the cosmetics in order to then brush this onto someone's eye. And they did that not only in order to protect the eyes in the harsh, glaring sun environment of Egypt, but because, again, this is where the divine resided, particularly Horus, and so it was done to protect the eyes. In fact, in ancient Egypt, the Egyptians practiced infanticide if a baby came out of the womb and their eyes were foggy or cloudy in some way, or there was some kind of defect, because they would say the image of the god is tainted in them and there's something wrong and we need to get rid of this child. So you can see a sense just the importance of the eye in ancient Egypt. Now, to talk about the eye was to talk about one's relationship to the god. So Narmer put this as a dedication to Horus as a way of saying, protect me, I believe in you, I'm in relationship with you, I trust you, and I need you to protect me. And so it's just really cool when you come to this passage in Deuteronomy 32:10, and it talks about all the ways in which God was providing for Israel, and it culminates with he guarded him as the apple of his eye, talking about this relationship, if you will, from a cultural perspective that the Israelites would have picked up on. Now, this phrase, apple of his eye, is actually not literally what's going on in the Hebrew. It's very close, but there's a little bit more going on here. And it has to do with this word apple, because when we hear apple of the eye, we talk about something that's very valuable, something that's very precious, something that's very important to us. And this is a good translation into the English, but there is just a different nuance from the Hebrew that I think takes this whole idea and goes one layer deeper, because the word apple is actually not in the Bible. In fact, this idea of the apple of one's eye, apparently the earliest etymology was in the 9th century AD, where they talked about that the pupil of the eye looked like an apple, and because that was like the center of your eye, and your eye is very precious, people started to make this connection that to say the apple of the eye was like to say, this significant, precious aspect of your life. But in Hebrew, this word apple is the Hebrew word ishon. And the word ishon is connected to the Hebrew word ish, which is the word for man. And so ishon literally in Hebrew is little man. And so if you were to translate this literally from the Hebrew, this last line is he guarded him not as the apple of his eye, but as the little man in the eye. It was as if this metaphor was being used to say God was intimate and personal with the people. And you go, how do you get that? Well, here's how you get the little man in the eye. If you're watching this with anybody, pause for a few moments, look them in the eye, and see how close you actually have to get before you see a reflection of yourself in the pupil of their eye. Now, if you're not with someone right now, I would encourage you to do this sometime today, but you got to choose wisely because it is a bit awkward, because when you do it, you can't be 6-7 feet away. Like, you have to be within 2 feet or so, maybe 3 feet of someone if your eyes are really good, in order to see this. Because this phrase talks about an intimacy, a closeness that, you're in personal space at this point. And what Moses is communicating about what God did with Israel is that, yes, connected to the eye was the relationship the divine has with humanity. But even more than that, God goes, I was with you. I was intimate. I was aware. I knew what was going on. I walked with you in the midst of this vulnerable desert experience, and I cared for you, and I provided for you, and we were in tight relationship together. Isn't that cool? It's just a really cool Hebrew idiomatic expression, little man in the eye. Now, I mentioned at the top of this teaching that there was going to be this phrase, and this phrase actually shows up several times in the Hebrew Scriptures in the Older Testament. Let me just show you one other place, because I think this is a great and helpful launching place for us as we go forward in 2019. This comes from Proverbs 7:2. And God says, keep my commandments and live, and my teaching as the apple of your eye. Well, you already know it's not apple of your eye. It's as the little man in the eye. So, but when God says this is what's so cool, is that when God talks about his commandments and his teaching, this is parallelism. They're saying the same thing. In fact, the word teaching here is the word Torah, which means teachings, instructions, God's instructions for life. And this is what God's commandments are. This is what God's teachings are. And if you'll recall from one of the earlier teaching series, we talked about that we find great life and freedom when we live into what God has called us to do. And that's what I love about this word live here, is it's talking about just this joy, this vibrancy, this thriving that takes place in life. And God goes, when you take my commandments and my teachings and you keep them as like the little man in the eye, what God was saying to his people is that I want you to be intimate and personal and close and interactive with my words, because my words give you life. You thrive when you live out my teachings and instructions for life. And so, friends, this is a time of year where we're all setting these goals about what we're going to eat and not eat, and what we're going to do by way of exercise, and what kind of business goals, or what kind of school goals, or whatever we have. This is the time of year where we have these resolutions. And one of the things I want to challenge you with is to have some sort of goal around the Bible. In fact, here's the question that I would ask, is that what is your goal for engaging the Bible this year? That what are you doing to be more intentional about engaging God's Word, to keep His commandments, to keep His teachings as the little man in your eye, that it's intimate, it's personal, it's I'm going to dig in so that I can thrive, so that I can live, so I can just have this ever-expounding joy, not because we know more, but because of what we've learned and are learning with the text. We're applying it and we're experiencing the transformational power of God in our lives, and we are thriving as a result of it. Maybe for some of you, it's going to be, I want to read the Bible this year. And if you are doing that as a goal, check out one of the reading plans. You can Google it. There are several different reading plans. There is a chronological reading plan, which takes to the earliest book that was written, and it takes you through for the year. There is a discipleship journal reading plan, which has you read from 4 different aspects of the Bible every day. So like I think day 1, you're in Genesis 1, and then you're in Psalm 1, Matthew 1, and then Acts 1 or Romans 1 or something like that. There's just a reading plan that'll take you through from literally you start in Genesis 1:1 and you end at the end of Revelation 22 by the end of the year. But maybe for some of you, you're going to commit to reading the Bible in a year. And that is fantastic. I actually had that goal last year. But one of the other things I just want to mention is just as valuable is not necessarily reading the Bible fast in order to get through an entire year, but to have the intentionality of reading the Bible slow. That you slow down, that it's not about how much you're reading. Maybe you set a time limit that I'm just going to look at this chapter and I'm going to read it for 15 minutes just over and over again, or I'm going to read it slow and I'm going to start implementing questions from the number one mistake most everyone makes reading the Bible ebook that we have available for free at Walking the Text, that most of you probably have if you're watching this, and you start going, I'm going to grow in my ability to ask better questions of the text. I am going to slow down and I am going to read very, very intimately, very, very strategically, and I'm going to start looking for things that I don't normally see because maybe you're reading through a little bit faster. And again, either way you look at that, whether you read the Bible in a year, or maybe even some of you took the challenge to read the entire Bible in 3 months, right? You just go, how am I going to engage the Bible? How am I going to be intentional about the Bible? And whether that's with reading the Bible, in addition to that, maybe it's you have a goal around, watching or engaging every one of these teaching series. Maybe you have other goals in mind. I would just challenge you just to have some kind of goal, one major goal that you can go after in 2019 that will help you engage God's Word as the little man in the eye so that you may thrive. So there's my New Year's challenge to all of you. Well, I mentioned also that next week we're going to be starting a series, and so I just wanted to mention to you, we're going to tackle a series on the Sabbath. And here's my contention. I believe this is one of the most significant things God ever gave as a gift to humanity that many of us don't open on a regular basis. It is a gift. It is an incredible gift from God. And I think many of us have a very truncated understanding of what the Sabbath was intended to be, that for many of us, the traditions we grew up in actually suffocated the life that Sabbath was supposed to give us. I think for many of us, we have a misunderstanding of certain passages about the Sabbath in the Bible. And for me, I can tell you that single-handedly, this has been the most significant rhythm in my life that changed my life. And so as we start a new year where, we're racing off to do this, this, and this, I actually want to talk about how we create a rhythm of rest in our lives. And I can't wait to launch this series next week. So friends, that's what's coming. So stay tuned next week for part 1 of our Sabbath series. So friends, thanks so much for stopping by. Thanks for watching. Again, I hope you have a great 2019. And may you today, this week, and this year, may you walk out the text well in your life.